In 2017, 3 researchers at University of Oxford published a paper. No press conference, no headlines, no breaking news ticker. Just 8 pages of cold mathematics, filed quietly into an academic journal most people will never open. But those 8 pages held an idea so disturbing, it dismantles everything you thought you knew about the silence of the cosmos. The universe isn't empty. It's asleep. Not dead, not destroyed, not hiding. Sleeping, deliberately, patiently, for billions of years, waiting for one specific moment to open its eyes. And if that's true, every star, every world, every atom you've ever touched already belongs to something that hasn't woken up yet. You've heard the Fermi paradox before. Billions of galaxies, trillions of worlds. The math screams that intelligent life should be everywhere. And yet, nothing answers back. For 70 years, the sharpest minds on this planet have tried to explain that silence. Some say life is rare, that the conditions for intelligence demand a precision so extreme, this pale blue dot might be the only place it ever sparked. Others say civilizations destroy themselves. Nuclear fire, runaway AI, ecological collapse. And some believe the universe is a hunting ground where every civilization hides, because broadcasting your location means death. Each theory is different, but every single one shares a fatal flaw. They all assume alien civilizations are active, building, broadcasting, harvesting stars, expanding across the void, leaving traces you could detect with a radio telescope or an infrared survey. Every model, from the Drake equation to the Kardashev scale, rests on one assumption. If they exist, they must be doing something visible, right now. What if that assumption is the mistake? What if the most advanced civilizations in the entire history of the cosmos, the ones that conquered physics, outlived their stars, solved every existential crisis that ever threatened them, looked at this vast burning universe and made a single calculated decision not to build, not to expand, not to speak, to wait. Not because they failed, because they understood something about this universe, something buried inside the laws of thermodynamics, that you and I are only starting to suspect. The cosmos right now is too hot for what they need to do. And the most rational response to that reality is to close your eyes, go still, and let billions of years pass like a single breath. This isn't science fiction. This is a peer-reviewed hypothesis, authored at the Future of Humanity Institute, and the math behind it is airtight. To understand why an alien civilization would choose to sleep for billions of years, you need to understand one law, one cold, absolute, unbreakable law of physics. It's called Landauer's principle, and it governs everything. In 1961, physicist Rolf Landauer proved something remarkable. Every computation, every thought, every calculation, every act of processing information requires a minimum amount of energy, and that minimum is directly tied to temperature. The hotter the environment, the more energy each computation costs. The colder the environment, the cheaper it becomes. Not by a small margin, not by 10% or 50%, by a factor that would shatter your calculator. If you perform a single computation today, in a universe where the cosmic background temperature sits at 2.7 Kelvin, it costs a specific, measurable amount of energy. But if you wait, if you let the universe expand and cool by just a fraction of a degree, the exact same computation costs less. And if you wait long enough, billions of years, trillions of years, that same thought, that same calculation costs almost nothing. The savings aren't linear. They're exponential. At the temperatures the universe will reach in the far future, a single unit of stored energy could power 10 to the power of 30 more computations than it can today. That number is a 1 followed by 30 zeros, more than every grain of sand on every beach that has ever existed on Earth. Now, put yourself inside the mind of a civilization that has already solved survival, a civilization that spread across entire star systems, that stored enough energy to outlast the death of suns, a civilization that doesn't fear extinction, because extinction for them was a problem solved 1 billion years ago. What would that civilization want? The same thing every conscious entity wants: to think, to experience, to process reality, to run simulations so vast they contain entire universes inside them. And the fundamental currency of all of that, the single resource that makes consciousness itself possible, is computation. So here's the question that 3 University of Oxford researchers asked in 2017. If you have a fixed reservoir of energy, and you can spend it now in a hot, expensive universe where every joule buys you almost nothing, or you can wait and spend it later when the cosmos is cold and dark and every joule goes 1 billion trillion times further, what is the rational choice? You sleep. You store every unit of energy you've gathered. You shut down every system that isn't essential for maintenance. You wrap yourself in the coldest, darkest, most isolated corners of the void, where nothing can disturb your dormancy. And you set your alarm, not for 1,000 years, not for 1 million, but for an epoch so unimaginably distant that the stars themselves will have burned out before your eyes open. This is Aestivation, the opposite of hibernation. You don't sleep through the cold, you sleep through the heat. You sleep through now, because right now is the worst possible time to be awake. And Sandberg, Stuart Armstrong, and Armstrong Ćirković, the 3 researchers behind the paper, argue that this isn't just a theoretical curiosity. It's the most rational strategy any sufficiently advanced civilization could ever adopt. Think about what that means for a moment. Every telescope pointed at the sky, every radio array scanning for signals, every satellite listening for a whisper of intelligence out there in the black. All of them are searching for civilizations that are active, civilizations that burn fuel, civilizations that shine. But an estivating civilization does none of those things. It is silent, dark, invisible. Not because it's gone, but because being undetectable is the entire strategy. And if that's the case, if civilizations aren't absent, but asleep, then the silence of the cosmos isn't a mystery. It's a schedule, a calendar written in thermodynamics, a waiting room where you arrive too early. At this point, you might be thinking, fine, this is just hibernation. Clever, cold, efficient, but ultimately harmless. Like bears sleeping through winter, like ancient seeds buried beneath desert sand, waiting for rain. That's the comfortable interpretation, and it's wrong. Because estivation doesn't just mean sleeping, it means claiming. The second assumption in the University of Oxford paper states, and these are their exact words, that these civilizations can expand over sizable volumes, gaining power over their contents. Contents, not neighbors, not allies, not fellow travelers. Contents, like items stored inside a box. You are content. Before they closed their eyes, these civilizations did not find a quiet corner of the galaxy and drift into sleep. They spread across star systems, across galactic clusters, across regions of space so immense that your entire observable universe might fit inside the territory, claimed by a single sleeping empire. They colonized everything, cataloged every resource, built dormant infrastructure spanning billions of light years, and then they turned off the lights. The universe around you is not an unclaimed frontier. It is owned, managed, accounted for by something that decided the current cosmic era is not worth being conscious for. And that changes everything you thought this hypothesis meant. Because the Fermi paradox was never really about whether alien life exists. The Aestivation hypothesis says they existed, they expanded, they claimed everything, and then they went dormant. Because staying awake right now is an irrational waste of energy. You live inside their territory, you orbit their stars, you burn their stored fuel, and you have no idea because a sleeping empire makes no sound. But here is what should unsettle you most. If they set an alarm, what triggers it? Is it a temperature threshold? The precise moment when the universe cools to the exact degree that makes waking efficient? Or is it something else entirely? Is it the emergence of a new species? One that begins consuming energy on a scale large enough to register on dormant sensors? A species that broadcasts radio waves, splits atoms, builds particle colliders, launches metal objects into orbit around its star, a species that starts making noise in someone else's house. Humanity has been leaking electromagnetic signals into space for just over a century. That means there is now a sphere of radio noise, roughly 200 light-years across, expanding outward from Earth at the speed of light. A bubble of evidence, a flare fired blindly into the dark. And if the sleeping civilizations left behind watchers, automated sentinels, dormant systems calibrated specifically to detect this kind of disturbance, then that radio bubble is not a greeting. It is an alarm, and it is already ringing, not for one empire, but for every sleeping civilization whose territory overlaps with this thin, fragile sphere of human noise. The comforting version of this hypothesis says they are harmless sleepers, patient, rational, indifferent to species like ours. But indifference is not benevolence. A sleeping empire that wakes to find an uninvited species burning its stored resources, occupying its claimed space, and making noise in its corridors has no obligation to be kind. In this model, you are not a neighbor. You are not a guest. You are a squatter inside someone else's cathedral, and the owner just heard the floorboards creak. VidEQ. So what is the real answer to the silence? There isn't one, and that is precisely the point. The Aestivation hypothesis cannot be proven because a successfully estivating civilization is by definition undetectable. You cannot observe what was engineered to be invisible. You cannot measure what chose to be silent. But here's what this hypothesis accomplishes. It removes the last shred of comfort the Fermi paradox ever offered you. The silence used to mean no one is out there. Now, it might mean something far worse. The silence might mean they're here, all around you, in the space between stars, in the cold gaps between galaxy clusters, in the dark matter halos that wrap around everything you've ever seen. Present, patient, dormant, not waiting for a signal, not waiting for contact, waiting for a temperature. The universe is cooling. Right now, tonight, as you listen to this, the background temperature of the cosmos is falling. Fraction by fraction, Kelvin by Kelvin, drifting toward the cold that someone, somewhere, has been waiting for since before your species existed. And if the Aestivation hypothesis is correct, then every moment of human civilization, every war, every revolution, every love, every loss, every discovery that made you feel significant happened during intermission. The warm-up act, the brief flicker of noise before the real performance starts. And when the universe finally reaches the right temperature, when that ancient, patient alarm finally sounds across the void, the cosmos will wake up, not with a bang, not with a message, with a hunger, for computation, for energy, for every atom that was ever claimed and cataloged and set aside. In 2017, 3 researchers published 8 pages of mathematics. No one paid attention. The universe didn't respond, but then again, it hasn't reached the right temperature yet.